Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Sorry for our extended hiatus. We'll do a little bit of Parshas Vaetchanan, chapter 4, verse 5. Chapter 4, verse 5. It says in the pasuk, "Re'ei limadati aschem chukim mishpatim kasher tzivani Hashem Elokoi." Moshe Rabbeinu has continued his words of farewell to Jewish people, and he says to them, "See that I've taught you laws as God has commanded me. Lasos kain b'kerev haaretz, to do within the land. Asher atem boim sham l'rishta." These are mitzvahs you're supposed to keep when you go into the land of Israel. Verse 6, "Ushmartem va'asisem." You should observe and do these mitzvos. These mitzvos are your wisdom in the eyes of the nations. That they will hear all of these laws. And they will say, the great nation is so wise. A really beautiful set of psukim. If you look at the Ramban on Pasuk Hey, in mine, it's the second paragraph of the Ramban, beginning with the words V'amar ki b'chukim. It's about 10, 15 lines into the Ramban. The Ramban says V'amar ki b'chukim u'bishpatim ta'alos gedolos. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, with these laws of the Torah, there are great effects. Shehem tiferes lo seya mina adam. Because if you observe these mitzvos, people will respect you for it. Va'afilu sonehem. Even people who hate the Jewish people, they'll still praise the Jewish people or begrudgingly respect the Jewish people for the Jewish people's mitzvos. There's another great effect that there's nothing comparable to it. That's verse 7, which I didn't read. That if you live a life connected to God and you observe his mitzvos, when you call out to God, God will be close to you. The nations will understand this. They'll recognize that the laws are done with wisdom. That the observance of the laws brings them close to God. And the other nations of the world will respect the Jewish people, will have reverence for the Jewish people. That's what's meant in verse 7. Who is such a great nation like this? It's an amazing thing to think about. Obviously, in a world of anti-Semitism, it's which is nothing new. It's a little bit hard to understand what these psukim really mean and how it actually kind of plays out. But at the point, according to the Ramban, it seems to be that even if they don't like us, they have to respect our standards, our moral integrity, our structure, our adherence to that structure, to our traditions, etc., etc. And besides everything else, this is fundamentally the way to live. It's upright and just. I thought it was a nice Ramban to think about. Moving ahead to verse 41. Verse 41, it's hard when I have such a small amount of material to work with in a day. I'm trying to get a little bit of cross-section of the parsha. Verse 41, after Moshe Rabbeinu has said all of these things to Jewish people about observing the mitzvos, it says, Oz yavdil Moshe shalosh arim be'eva hayardain. Then Moshe Rabbeinu set aside, designated 3 cities on his side of the Jordan. Verse 42, etc., etc. This is the idea that if a person kills unintentionally, but there's some fault to the person, they need to run to the city of refuge. This is a very, very interesting part of the parsha. What the connection is between Moshe Rabbeinu's drasha and designating cities of refuge is very difficult to understand. By the way, the halacha was that the laws of the cities of refuge wouldn't kick in until the Jewish people had settled in the land of Israel. So this is not even practically relevant at this juncture. Besides everything else, the very first word of the verse jumps out at you, Uz. Then, at that moment, it's emphasizing that this is like the ideal time to do it for some reason. Difficult to understand. Rashi on Pasuk Mem Aleph, Oz Yavdil, Nasan Leiv, he really put his mind to it. Lios Chored L'Davar Sheyavdilim, that he wanted to be very diligent in setting aside these cities. Amar Moshe, mitzvah she'efshar l'kaima akai mena. Moshe Rabbeinu said, listen, if there's anything I can do, if there's any positive things I can still do in this world, I want to do it. I don't want to wait. I don't want to push it off. Who cares that it's not halachically in play yet? I can do another thing for my people. I can serve another function of being in this world. I don't have that much longer. That's what Rashi says. If you go to the Ramban, Pasuk Mem Aleph, Az Yavdil Moshe Shalosh Arim, Piresh Reb Avram, Biyom Shivdil Moshe Shalosh Arim, Az Amar Divrei Abris. Ibn Ezra actually says that we're sort of looking at the whole thing wrong. I keep on talking to you about, he said this drasha, now he's setting aside the cities. Actually, says the Ibn Ezra was saying, happens to be that day he also set aside, like he set aside the cities of refuge, and he also gives this drasha. That's how the Ibn Ezra explains it. The Ramban says, I don't think that's the right way to look at this pasuk. Aval hu k'pshuto. It means what it seems to mean. Ki Moshe asav kol Yisrael levor lehem haTorah. Moshe gathered the Jewish people together, all the Jewish people, to explain the Torah to them. Upasach lohem b'divrei hatochachos, and he began with words of rebuke to them. V'kasher amar b'fneiam tochachosav, b'ameh she'asu v'azharos avodazav v'yich Hashem v'hishim lehem she'yishim repukav v'mitzvosav l'man yitav lehem. After rebuking them for the different things they did incorrectly and urging them to observe God's commandments, Oz Amar b'ma'amadim lifneim. Then he said, as he stood before them, Ata nikayim hamitzvah asher tzivanu Hashem. Now that I've said all of this to you, let's fulfill a mitzvah from Hashem. V'tiyena betzer b'midbar v'ramos b'gilad v'golan b'bashan arei miklat lanushama karotzeach b'shtadanu. We were discussing the importance of keeping the mitzvahs. Let's do a mitzvah, everybody. I'm going to designate these cities. These cities aren't even halachically impactful or effective until the cities in the land of Israel are designated. Amar mitzvah shabal yadenu nekaimosa leman yitavlanu. I've just been talking to you about the importance of doing all these mitzvahs. So let me show you how important it is. If there's another mitzvah to do, let's do it. Then after this, he begins the 5th chapter, and he called out loudly to all the Jewish people, and he said to them, Shema Yisrael es hachukim ves hamishpatim. Jewish people, listen to the laws. In the beginning of chapter 5, Moshe Rabbeinu gets into explaining specific mitzvos. But I mean, this is essentially like what Rashi said, but the Ramban gives a little bit more texture for it. Now I'd like to see the Kli Yakar on Pasuk Mem Aleph. Az Yavdil Moshe Shalosh Arim. Bekishur Pasuk Zeh Ma'inin HaKodem Yatza Mefarshim Lilkot V'Lomatzu Bir Maspik Umau Lashon Az. The Mefarshim really grapple with how this is connected to the previous psukim and why it says the word then. Listen closely. There's such a thing as beginning a mitzvah, even if you're not going to bring it to fruition. If a mitzvah comes your way, you have to do whatever you can. David HaMelech talks to Shlomo HaMelech about that I haven't been able to build the Beis HaMikdash, but I've set aside materials. He knew, David knew he wasn't going to build the Beis HaMikdash, the temple. He began the mitzvah. He knew that his son would be the one to truly build it. Derech Mashal. So imagine the following proverb. Imagine an elderly individual planting an esrog tree. He says he wants it to be that people can use the esrog from this tree for the mitzvah of Sukkot. He knows he's not going to be alive when the first esrog that actually can be used is picked. He'll plant the esrog tree so that his progeny will be able to use an esrog. It's a beautiful mashal to think about. And you have many things like this. If you look at verse 40, excuse me, Moshe Rabbeinu says you should observe the laws of Hashem, which I command you today, which he will be good for you and your children after you. Ratzalomar, Shim Tavu Liyotcha Ezo Mitzvah, Tekaima Hayom La'alter. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayom, what I command you today, if you get any mitzvah that comes your way, do it. Afal Pi She'ein Tova Nigmar, V'nira La'alter, even if the effect of the mitzvah is not apparent right away. Kim Bizman Shebonecha Acharecha Yigmura Mitzvah. It says that's what it says. Observe the mitzvos, that it will be good for you and for your children after you, even if you can't even imagine, even if the mitzvah will be fulfilled in your lifetime. But you'll start the ball rolling. Your children will fulfill the mitzvah. Okay. So he says, might not be in your ability to complete the mitzvah. Why did he have to say in the pasuk, it'll be good for you and for your children after you, as opposed to your children before you? Why did he have to say after you? He said the reason why it says after you is to emphasize this point, to emphasize this idea that it might be far down the road. You might not even be around anymore. So Nemar, with this in mind, it says in the pasuk, Oz Yafir Moshe Shalosh Avim, Afal Pishen Kotos, Achiv Los on Shalosh Baaretz, Kol Makom Amar Moshe Mitzvah Shabal Yadi Akaimena. That's the idea of setting aside the cities of refuge. It's not even going to be relevant in his lifetime. It's not going to work. But he did whatever he could to lay the groundwork for the next generation. That's why it says then, Yisrael in Zeb Paskakodem Miyad Moshe Asahu Allah Yiru. He was just talking to them about the value of every single mitzvah, about the value of doing whatever you can from a mitzvah and let the next generation finish the game. So Oz, at that moment, he wanted to show them how much he meant it. He says, I'm going to give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about. So it's more than just the general mitzvahs are great. It's more than I have an opportunity. This whole moment was a remarkable teaching opportunity to the Jewish people, not only the value of a mitzvah, but a whole perspective of moving things forward from generation to generation. It's an interesting thing to think about. So we discussed the Ramban regarding Moshe's urging Jewish people to value each and every mitzvah. We discussed this issue of Moshe's designating the cities of refuge. We spoke about Rashi and the Ramban and the Kli Yakar.